All right, today I've got a tall order. I'm gonna try to make something really boring, a little bit of entertainment. We're gonna see if we can talk a little bit about RO units, their function, how they can work the best for us, because I think it's a really important topic that we don't talk enough about. So let's go inside and grab a unit. I really like this topic. I feel like this is right up my alley because I'm a sucker for knowing how things work. And this is the kind of thing that I spend a lot of time just doing countless hours of research on my own. So I have no formal schooling. I have no chemistry background. I really don't know the first thing about chemistry. So that being said, I want to talk about RO units and how important it is to us as a hobby. It's something that you've heard me use the term non-negotiable before, and I feel like this is one of those topics. It is non-negotiable to have good quality water to start with. It doesn't matter how good you keep your tank. It doesn't matter how good of a hobbyist or how dedicated you are to doing the work. If you got really bad water to start with, or even subpar water to start with, you're not in a good spot. You're going to have a hard time really trying to figure out what's going on in your aquarium until you know for 100% certain that your source water is not the issue. So I want to talk about a couple things in order today. One, what you're going to find in your water. Two, what the RO unit does for you. And then three, how do we actually get it to work best for us? And also maybe to save a little bit of money in the long run. If you've got a well, if you've got city water, it really doesn't matter. There's going to be a handful of things that you're going to see. You're going to see different types of metals. You're going to see different types of organics. And you're also going to see different types of treatment materials like chlorines or chloramines. And the entire purpose of an RO unit is to try to remove everything as clean as we can possibly get to the point where it's not impactful on your aquarium. So I said, let's talk about organics really quick. Organics are things like decaying plant matter and human sewage, stuff like that. There's all sorts of physical waste that's going to end up permeating the ground, and it'll end up at some point in time part of our water sourcing. If there's wells, if there's any kind of runoff and that water is being used for different purposes. Chlorines, chloramines, it's all happening through a water treatment process. These are materials that we just can't have in our reef tanks. They're not tolerant to it at all, and those are easy tests. We can understand our water just by doing a couple simple things. And then there's hardness issues. There is metal issues. So look, going back to what I started with, I'm not a scientist. I really don't know the first thing about it, but I know that it can't be in the water. Okay, so moving on to the unit itself. Part of the reason why I wanted to do this video is because I get a lot of comments from our regular customers that walk into the store and they look at these things and they're like, it's super intimidating. What do I do with that? It doesn't have any kind of motor on it. What am I supposed to do? Well, it's really quite basic, and a lot of this video is going to talk about how it functions, because that's how we know how to get it to work best for us. First, this is not in any way, shape, or form a promotion for Bulk Reef Supply. We sell a bunch of these. We've got a bunch of them in the store. It was just the easiest for me to grab. Companies like SpectraPure make really good RO units. They work just about the same. AquaFX makes a really good RO unit. It works just about the same. Some of them have a left to right flow. Some have a right to left. You should know that when hooking them up. But most of the time, they're going to come with some sort of instruction that says that water enters in one side. And in this case, here with the red, this is going to be our source water. And your first stage is always going to have a sediment filter. So it's usually some sort of like floss or spun or woven material. And they come in different particulate removal sizes. Generally speaking, they're going to be like a 1 micron or a 5 micron. Second, and these come in different configurations too. Second is always going to be some sort of carbon block. And the carbon block serves a huge purpose in this entire thing. Sometimes there'll be 2 of those. Sometimes there will be 2 of these. But in this case, there's only 3 on the bottom and 1 on the top. And it'll be a sediment or carbon. And then here in this one will be a DI. And in this case, this is a mixed bed. I don't know if you can see here. There's like a blue and a red media inside of here. These mixed beds are both positively and negatively charged resins, and they both serve a different purpose. You'll see in some cases, I think Bulk Reef sells one that is an add-on where it's an anion and a cation. So it's these two materials separated into two separate canisters. I definitely recommend that in cases where you really have terrible water, but we'll get into more of that afterwards. On the top, this is the workhorse. This is supposed to be the part that does the bulk of the work. And if you just pull that line off the fitting, inside of here is your membrane. A lot of times I get asked how long they last. If you really treat this well and you keep your carbon in good shape and your sediment in good shape on a pretty consistent basis, this can last you a year, it can last you 18 months. Sometimes it's going to be less. I mean, it really depends on the water quality going into it, but it's terrible. If it's terrible, it's not going to last you that long. It is important for this to fit really snugly in here because this is called a brine seal, and pressure is everything to these units. The way that this works is this entire body is pressurized, generally about 60 psi. That's kind of the goal. Most municipal water sources are going to give you 50 to 65 psi at your tap, if you're on city water, of course. And as it fills this cavity with pressure, that water is permeating each one. I don't know if you can see each one of these little tiny layers of silk screen. And as it makes its way through, it's going to end up in this center tube. And because it's being fed in this direction, some will be rejected out the waistline here. And then that remainder is going to be your product water. So I like how they did this on these bulk resupply units because the red kind of sounds bad, right? That's your bad water. That's your incoming water. Black is waste, and then blue is product. Nice and snug fit. Make sure that this O-ring doesn't end up getting pinched. And then these push connect fittings, they're exactly that. They just push it. Make sure that they bottom out in the seat. Okay, so first, second, third stage. So you can see here, because this is still dirty water, it's indicated by red. So it's coming into the sediment. Then second, it goes into the carbon. And then third, it makes its way up to feed the end of the membrane. And like I said, so this is wastewater. As it does reject water, the non-rejected water is going to go right down to the DI. And if you follow that around, you're going to see it goes into this final stage. Let's say hypothetically you've got the additional DI canisters here and you run 2 carbons. In that case, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5, 6, 7, and so on and so forth. Why is that important to know? Because if you've bought one of these used, well, there's a pretty good chance that you don't know what media to put inside of them. So if you follow that plumbing and you understand that it goes through 2 and then it goes up to the top, then these 2 are supposed to be sediment and carbon. Final stage being DI. Now on this piece here, there's a T. This is your TDS meter. This is going to be kind of our marker to understand what's going on with the unit. So obviously we want 0 TDS or as close to it as you can possibly get. And then on the other side, this here is red. So we know that this indicates dirty water. So a lot of times you'll see on the first selection on this TDS meter, that'll be in. In is going to indicate what the water is going into the membrane. Coming out is going to be what the membrane just did for you going into the DI resin. In order to add these media cartridges, the rubber is going to go up on them. They just drop in. There's a little guide on the bottom. They sit, they can't really move anywhere. And just make sure when you're adding them, you kind of give it a little wiggle to make sure that it centers on that pin. As long as it threads on nice and smoothly, you know you didn't pinch the cartridge on that center pin. Don't crank down on these. Just a little bit more than hand tight. And they give you these little wrenches. This is more to get it off than it is to put it on. Don't crank down on them because these will crack at the top, and then that O-ring doesn't seat properly. So just a little bit more than tight. Lastly, there's a couple more components. This is going to be a flush kit. The purpose of this is to open it up all the way and allow all the scale to flush off of the membrane. Cycling this once every few times that you use the unit is a good practice. I really don't know the frequency. I'm sure it depends more on how hard your water is. But yeah, if you use it 2-3 times, go ahead and open this up and let it run for 30 minutes. And then there's only a couple of other components here that are worth talking about. That is this diaphragm valve. This allows you to put some sort of either float or relay switch on your product water tank. And as soon as you have enough pressure inside of this line, this other side of the diaphragm closes and it stops your wastewater from flowing too. This is your pressure gauge. Like I said, you probably want this operating in that 60 PSI range. If you don't have it in that 60 PSI range, you really should probably consider getting a booster pump. And then I think that's it for the actual components. Now let's talk about when to change what. Okay, so this is really, really important. I was talking in the beginning of this video about how you can potentially save money. We're going to treat this membrane like it's gold, and we're also going to treat this DI like it's gold. Why am I saying that? Well, that's because this is, I think, somewhere around 30 bucks to refill. Maybe it's less. And then this membrane is right around 40 or 50 bucks to replace. If you don't have to replace a $40 or $50 membrane or a $30 set of DI, and you only had to focus on replacing these two initial pre-filters, then you probably save a few bucks, right? These carbon blocks are like $15 or $20, and they're pretty much going to be what saves your butt. There's different types of carbon out there, and actually the ones that Bulk Reef Supply sells, Ryan did a really good video on this product years ago, and they talked about how many gallons of water you can actually run through this as opposed to a regular non-catalytic carbon. But don't forget, this is responsible for taking out chloramines too. So it's got to be a good catalytic carbon, and it has to be able to handle a good amount of water going through it. Otherwise, as soon as this spends, I think the tolerance on these membranes is like 0.1 ppms of chlorine. And the problem with that is as soon as you're subjecting this membrane to it, you're pretty much toast. So then you spend all your time and energy replacing this last one, which is your scavenger. That's not necessary at all. If you were just able to keep this in good shape, then you preserve your membrane, and then you also preserve the scavenging media. Depending on how bad the water is that you have, or how high the levels of chlorine are, chloramines. But if you just took a dip strip and you tested the water that's coming out of the wastewater line, which is your black line going to the drain, and you tested the chlorines with that simple dip strip, every month or so that you use this unit, you could probably, I would say probably more than double the life of this, as long as you never let chlorine touch the membrane. And as long as the membrane is doing good, the DI stays. So when do you change the membrane? Well, there's a couple ways to know that. Because we know what the water is going into the unit on this switch, and then the water coming out is going to be your product water. I personally like to have this line out testing after the DI, and then my inline is actually coming from the membrane into the DI. And the reason why I do that is I want to know that this membrane is giving me close to 2 TDS going into the DI, because that tells me that the membrane is still doing its job. If I've got 4, 5, 6, 10, 12 coming out of the membrane, this is important. If it's coming at 10 out of the membrane, then the membrane is toast. probably the carbon's toast. As long as you look at what the membrane is giving you going into the DI, then you're gonna also save on the DI, and then you're gonna know what's going on in this, because you can't look at it and say, well, yeah, it's good or not. It's a white canister, it doesn't say anything. So you gotta know 2 TDS or as close to it as you can get with your water source coming out of the membrane going into the DI is what you should use to gauge whether or not you're changing the membrane. Chlorine and its chloramine reading, you need to use a dip strip or some sort of free chlorine, or I'm sorry, total chlorine tester in order to be able to understand if the carbon is any good or not. Because I can't tell you how many times I see a customer come to the store and they say, all right, I need to change all my filters. But they don't know that this is probably still good. Or they don't know that the carbon was dead 6 months ago. I'm sure I could go deeper into this, but like I said, I'm no chemist. But if you understand that you always change the sediment if you see a bunch of debris on it, or you always change the sediment at the same time you change the carbon. These two are called pre-filters for a reason. They're preserving the membrane. You change the membrane based on your TDS going into the DI canister. And it's easy to figure out. Wherever it's going into this canister, you're testing the DI. I'm sorry, you're testing the TDS. And then when it comes out of this, the out is your product water. You want 0. Let's hypothetically say these two are new. This is giving you in the vicinity of 2 TDS going into the DI, but you go through the DI a lot. Well, that means that optimally it's functioning before the DI resin. It may be worth it to you to change the way that this plumbs and do 2 carbons, then plumb it to the membrane, and then go to the second split stage DI setup. I think they call it a Pro DI set. I'm not 100% sure on that, but it's anion, cation, and then mixed bed. Because it's very possible that you just have a bunch of organics that are making it through. The carbon's not doing the job. The membrane's not going to do anything about that, but you have to scavenge that in order to get the TDS down to 0. Or because you just spend this DI resin mixed bed so quickly. That's pretty much it. The only other thing I would consider is when you're hooking these up, try to keep them in a more cool climate. Sometimes I see them outside and I think that there's a temperature rating on these membranes. I think they're not supposed to run over 90 degrees or something like that. Don't quote me on that number because I'm not exactly 100% sure what the temperature is, but I know they don't like to run warm. If they do run warm, their lifespan is a lot shorter. So, you know, if you've got a garage, keep it out of the sun. It's better than nothing. If you can, keep it in the house. To be honest with you, I'd prefer to keep them in the house. I see a lot of times they're underneath sinks or in laundry rooms. If you've got what do you want to call if you've got like a washroom sink or something like that you can use one of these sink adapters, that's good because you can actually still use the sink, but then have the benefit of it being tapped into your water source. Or anywhere you've got a washer dryer hookup, they use these. I think they call these hose bib adapters. It's easy. Like I said, red, that's where your source water is. And then you just got to make sure you've got a drain nearby. Other than that, I mean, this is pretty cut and dry. But I'd like to show you the reason why I have anything that I can contribute on this topic is because I learned everything about these first with a unit like this, but then secondarily, we make a lot of water here. So I'd like to actually show you our unit in-house and a little bit about why we use what we use. We're over here behind our farm, actually behind our shipping department, and this is where we have our main water filtration system here. It's a lot going on, and I'm not going to get too deep into it, but I want you to understand, like, this whole entire thing is nothing more than just a bigger scaled handful of components that you have in a standard RO unit. I use the term pre-filter. My water line comes in here. this is my very first stage of sediment filtration. And we change it pretty frequently, but it's visual. It's a 1 micron sediment filter. We know if it looks dirty, it's probably time to change it. But we also use pressure gauges at every step, and that's just to see if there's loss between stages. So we have our first and our second carbon tower. I think these are both 1.3 or 1.5 cubic feet of media. And like I said, there's a pressure gauge at each stop, so I know that should this be getting bound up, it's time to backwash it, because it's probably gonna not allow enough water through in order to get to the next stage properly. After it comes out of my carbon, you'll see it goes into another pre-filter, and we do this because this carbon type is very, it makes a lot of soot. And these 1 micron filters here and here are in line before it hits the unit here. But again, I've got pressure gauges here in order to be able to see if there's pressure drop. So I've got pre-filter, I've got carbon, and then I've got another pre-filter. Coming out of that unit, it goes directly into here. And this is I wanna say it's either 3 or 5,000 gallon per day from AquaFX, which pretty much consists of 2 4-inch by 40-inch membranes. There's one here and there's one here. And this unit here runs right around 100 PSI coming out of this big booster pump. And we're making in the vicinity of 7,000 to 9,000 gallons of water a week, just salt water. So that means we're making anywhere between 14 and 18,000 gallons of RO water every single week. But the idea is just to talk about the function. It's the same exact thing as a small unit: sediment, carbon, pre-filter, RO membranes. And then as soon as it leaves the RO membranes, it's going into our first stage of DI. And I've actually got 3 stages of DI here. 2 of them are a lower grade than the last one. The last one is just like the Hail Mary. God forbid anything makes it through, it's gonna hit that last stage, and I know for sure we've got clean water. We're making right around 3 gallons per minute of product water. Just like we talked about in the smaller unit, we know that if the TDS coming out of my membranes is gonna be, in the smaller reference case, 2 or so, it's time to change the membrane. Here, we actually do it at 4. It's more measured by volume than it is by TDS. If I fall too far below 2 3/4 gallons per minute, then I know these membranes are pretty well done for. The only feature that this one has that our smaller units don't have is a recirculation option. I can actually recirculate water that's coming out of one membrane to go back through circulation, and it'll help reduce some of the wastewater. And it's similar to the piggyback membranes that you can buy, where you can run 2 75s for 150. It's very similar. It's plumbed a little bit different, but it has the same concept. Lastly, we measure our product water by resistivity. So we're measuring the amount of ohms that the water carries coming out of the unit, as opposed to TDS, which is really not much different. Actually, it is the same technically, but this is 1 mega ohm or above. This indicator light turns red. And then out of the very last stage, I read 0. And you'll see here that if it says should always be 1.0. If not, then we know something's making it past my last stage. So we test the chlorine coming out of the carbon down here out of this little drain line, because that's my wastewater. So that means that anything that made it through here and going into the membrane that got rejected, if it has chlorine in it, then there's a really good likelihood that these are dead. So that's how we do that, just like you would at home. I told you to use the dip strip. If you read anything over 0.1, in our case, then we know that we can't any longer hold off on changing this carbon. So the concept is exactly the same. It's just much bigger and a few more components. So I know I feel like I can be a run-on sentence, but that's because I'm passionate about what I talk about, what I know. I like to share my knowledge with other enthusiastic reefers. You know, so if you do like this kind of the content, I like to do it. I just don't want it to be dry and boring. So keep coming back. If these are the type of videos that appeal to you, I'd like to do more of them, because I do like I said, to share that information with everybody. And I may not know the best way about it, but I do understand reefing. I do love corals, and I love being able to meet all the people that come to the shop and say, man, I love seeing your videos. It's cool to be part of. So if you're ever in the area, make sure you stop by and say hi. I do attend a lot of the shows, so I'd love to meet you all. And don't forget to like and subscribe, hit the notification bell, and check back and see us next time around.